What's going on YouTube? It's Teej back again with another video, and today we're talking about the Chicago Bears and our season preview series, and hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you do, be sure to hit that like button. It would help me out a ton. If you're new around here, want to see the rest of this series and more football content in general, be sure to hit that big red subscribe button. And tell me what you think about the Bears down below in the comments section. How many wins do you think this team can get? Who are some X factors, and what are some games you're looking forward to watching this team play? But even more than that, what do you think Justin Fields looks like in year two? What do you think about the Matt Eberflus, Ryan Poles hires? Love to have your thoughts. Let's talk about the Bears down below in the comments section. If you missed the previous videos in this series, definitely go back and check those out. You get a feel for how this all works, but I'll continue to break it down as we move forward in this video, starting with win range and my projected win total, and I'll kind of give you, my thoughts on the roster position group by position group. But 3 to 5 wins feels about right. I think this is a team that is vying for maybe not the number 1 overall pick, but probably top 3, top 5. It's just not a great roster the way I look at it right now. And on my way too early NFC North regular season record predictions, I had them at 3 wins when running through their schedule. And honestly, it's kind of hard to even get them to that 3-win total just because, looking at the roster, huge Justin Fields, guys. He was my number 3 prospect in that draft class, not the number 3 quarterback, number 3 prospect as a whole. Big Justin Fields guy. And it's just kind of unfortunate that even with the signing of Riley Reiff to play left tackle, and you bring in a Michael Schofield to patch up the interior of the offensive line, especially after losing James Daniels, that offensive line's still not great. I mean, it's improved with Reiff and Schofield, but it's still not a great unit. It'd be interesting to see where Tevin Jenkins kind of fits in the mix there, or is it Larry Borom that's going to be the starting right tackle? Good camp battle to watch there. But then, the wide receiver room, we'll talk about Velus Jones Jr. later, but it's Darnell Mooney, who I like Darnell Mooney, but I don't think of him as a 1. And also, if we're being honest with ourselves, we live in an NFL where you need more than just 1-1 if you're going to be, Super Bowl competitive. And I don't think this team has a single 1, maybe a high-end, number 2 with Darnell Mooney. But that wide receiver room is looking rough. Anytime you're signing and planning on giving significant playing time to Byron Pringle, I think you're in a bad spot. So then you look at the running back position, a little more, positive there. Khalil Herbert was fantastic. Great 5th-round pick out of Virginia Tech. And then, David Montgomery has proven to be a really solid running back. You can do a variety of different things coming out of Iowa State. So I think they have a solid running back group, but it's going to be a lot of, Justin Fields having to play like a superhero. Herculean efforts needed week in and week out for this offense to be anything worth watching. Then you switch sides to the other side of the ball. I'm a big fan of Matt Eberflus. He's had a great tenure as a DC in Indianapolis. I can't wait to see what that defense looks like, especially with some of the talent. We'll kind of hit on that once we get there. But this pass rush is looking pretty desolate, especially after the Khalil Mack trade, where like $27 million in dead cap, but frees up a ton of what they can do next offseason when it comes to free agency and extending players, et cetera, et cetera. But that being said, right now, huge hole. And especially when you consider Robert Quinn may be the next guy to go, right? Like, it's him, and then we'll talk about Trevis Gipson later. But it's a lackluster group with Robert Quinn, and then to think that he might get traded before the NFL trade deadline, it's going to get that much worse. So, barring someone who really steps up, kind of comes out of nowhere, maybe like a Charles Harris, what he did with Lions last year, maybe Chicago has someone like that on the roster. We'll have to wait and see. But that pass rush looks pretty tough after moving on from Akeem Hicks as well, on another player that's now, not on the roster. He's down in Tampa, vying for a potential Super Bowl. So rough situation there when it comes to getting the quarterback. The linebacking group, of course, anchored by Roquan Smith. Reports have been that he's going to move from Mike to Will linebacker, and it'd be interesting to see him that now Shaquille Leonard role, and if he is as turnover crazy, and can he kind of generate that many of forced fumbles and interceptions that Shaquille Leonard has been able to do in that Eberflus system, or is that just a Shaquille Leonard thing, right? We'll have to wait and see there, but even if he is not, just this turnover-creating machine like Leonard is, he's very athletic, solid in coverage, knows for the football, great tackler as well, one of the best linebackers in football. So you feel confident there in the middle, but he is starting to get in his upper 20s, so once this team really does kind of fix up the roster, assuming they do that, I wonder what that timeline looks like with Smith, his career, is he in his 30s? Is he somebody they have to eventually move on from? I'm fascinated. So then you move into the secondary, and we'll talk about Jaquan Brisker later, but we'll also kind of talk about, Kyler Gordon here. Him and Jalen Johnson, really like that pairing. Nice, solid, young cornerback duo, both on rookie contracts, so you're saving a lot of money with those two. And Jalen Johnson looked good his rookie year before, injury kind of ended his season early. But this Matt Eberflus defense doesn't, command excellent cornerback play. And it's a lot of cover two, and it's a lot of playing the flats if you're one of those corners. But that being said, I'm kind of intrigued by what, Jalen Johnson can kind of do in that spot. And same can be said about, Kyler Gordon, especially considering he was a guy who was kind of lost some of the hype going into the combine that he had because of his size and maybe not having as electric, 40 time and some of those athletic measurables. But I still think in this defense, he's a really, really solid fit. Played a ton of zone at Washington, so schematically makes a ton of sense there. And then we'll talk about Brisker later, but pairing him up with Eddie Jackson, I can't wait to see that duo, especially if it is a lot of too high, a lot of cover 2, cover 4. And you look at what, Kari Willis, now retired, but he and Julian Blackmon, what they did as those deep safeties for Eberflus in Indianapolis, they became one of the best duos at the safety spots in the NFL, despite being very young players. So Eddie Jackson, someone who's a little bit more veteran and has had years where he has been a turnover-creating monster. And then Jaquan Brisker, this guy coming from an unbelievable school. We'll talk about him more later, but that duo could be really something special. And, maybe the backside of that unit, the secondary, allows that, what looks like a weak pass rush to kind of get a little bit more out of that group and hopefully have this defense, watchable, because I am concerned about that offense. But let's move on. Realistic goal, lay the foundation. I know this is such a lame thing to say here, but man, if Justin Fields shows something, if he can do enough given the ecosystem around him, okay, there you go. We can move forward with some confidence in year 3. That's good to see. If the running backs still, look like, okay, these are guys we can hold on to for the next, 4 years or so. That's a nice duo. We're happy with that. Maybe it is Tevin Jenkins starting at right tackle and he shows you something. Okay, that's awesome. And, maybe Riley Reif is better than expected and you kind of have the first dibs to re-sign him. He's starting to get up there in age. So that's not a great example, but it's just about seeing these young players shine. And, maybe I'm wrong with Darnell Mooney. Maybe he is more than just like a solid complement receiver. He's not just a 2. Maybe he is a true alpha wideout, and you can see that this upcoming year. That's awesome. But then also laying that foundation comes from, okay, now we know our secondary set. Let's say, Gordon and Brisker both hit. They play well opposite of Jalen Johnson and Eddie Jackson. Okay, boom. Don't have to worry about the secondary. Fantastic. And if, Roquan Smith takes well to that will position spot that he's moving to, fantastic. So it's just about laying the foundation. This is a game of patience this year for Chicago. It's not going to be pretty this year. This is kind of what I was talking about in my Falcons video. It's not going to be good. I'm sorry. You're going to lose a lot of games, but just be excited thinking about what young players the next jersey I can get. That's kind of what my mentality and thinking would be. Who's the next jersey I'm going to get? Let's hope some of these young players are exciting to watch. And in 5 years, maybe when I'm competing for a Super Bowl, I could figure on them being on the roster. Reach goal. So there's kind of a 2-part here. Fields shows it. And I mean more than just like, okay, this guy did more than what he should have with what is around him. But if Fields starts carrying that unit and you start winning games you really don't have any business winning, then you're into something. And you're talking about a guy who, with some help, could take that superstar leap forward. But then also this rookie class popping. Then that kind of goes back to Brisker and Gordon, but also Velus Jones Jr., which kind of leads me to my X factors. If those young guys hit, then you can feel better about the direction of this, Eberflus and Poles era. And I should also add this caveat. My reach goal is much more player focused. My realistic goal is kind of more coaching staff focused. What does this Eberflus defense look like? Do you have the personnel for it? If not, what pieces are we missing? And then also, what's Luke Getsy like as offensive coordinator? First time OC, coming over from Green Bay. Had a head coaching interview, right? Had opportunities to be an OC elsewhere. So what does that offense look like and what tweaks need to be made? So I need to make that caveat. Realistic goal, definitely more coaching staff based. And then my reach goal adds on to that and says, hey, these players are better than what we expect and exceed expectations. So let's move on to my X factors now that I got that out of the way. Velus Jones Jr. I hate putting rookies on here as my X factors because it's just such an easy, obvious one. And I also have to say, X factors are not superstars. Like, I know Roquan Smith's good. I know David Montgomery's a good player. I don't need to say that they're an X factor. I just know they're good. These are guys who, if they exceed expectations, this team could outperform my expectations. Or if they fall short, this team could disappoint even more than maybe my 3-win total. So that's kind of my thinking when going into this section. But, Velus Jones Jr. was not a guy I was really high on. Best skill set, in my opinion, was, one, he's also 25. But, putting that aside, for this upcoming season, I really just saw a guy he's a pretty good yak player, pretty tough to bring down, physical. Like I said, hard to bring down with the ball in his hands. So maybe he provides some value there. But, Byron Pringle and him as the guys trying to complement Darnell Mooney, I'm skeptical. It does make me feel a little better that, apparently Justin Fields was really vouching for Velus Jones Jr. in the 3rd round, which is earlier than I would have taken him. But if Fields likes him, that's an encouraging first step. And maybe I'm wrong, right? Like, I've been wrong plenty before. And, the NFL draft is such a low percentage game, and it's not a great gamble in a lot of ways, but it's such a fascinating process to watch that we're all enamored by it. But Velus Jones Jr. could exceed expectations. Maybe he's 25, ready to roll, and that maturity is something that stood out in the pre-draft process. I wasn't in the interview. I wasn't in that room, so I can't speak to that. So if he's better than what I would think, or even just kind of general third round wide receiver expectations, all right, then that offense could be more, and maybe that allows, because I think Darnell Mooney is someone who's pretty special after the catch, and he's just really, really fun to watch with the ball in his hands, really twitchy, good lateral movement. I think he's already an asset in that yak game, but maybe if you have Velus Jones Jr. doing that work, you can allow Darnell Mooney to focus solely on being a field stretcher. So maybe that does open up what you can do with Mooney. And then Trevis Gibson, this is a guy who actually had a pretty solid pass rush grade per Pro Football Focus, like upper 80s. So I was kind of surprised to see that, and the highest overall edge grade that wasn't Khalil Mack. So that's encouraging. 4th round pick in the 2020 draft, if memory serves. So younger player and someone who's kind of just broke onto the scene despite being a day 3 selection and being a couple years into his career and not being someone who is known by a majority of NFL fans. So that's exciting. And really what this really comes down to is, like I said earlier on, there's going to have to be somebody, if this team wants to be anything more than a 3 to 5 win team this upcoming year, they're going to need somebody who is not named Robert Quinn to exceed expectations and become something that opposing offenses have to factor in when it comes to a pass rusher. And maybe Gibson's that guy. So time will tell. Maybe he just looked kind of promising in a rotation type of role, and maybe the full starting position isn't something that's going to suit him well, or he can rise to that occasion. But if he does, that's a big hit there for Chicago. And then Jaquan Brisker, kind of already talked about him, but great athlete coming from a school that produces athletes left and right. And he was this guy who felt like a natural fit as a 2-high safety. And you pair him up with Eddie Jackson, these guys who have coverage ability. You can also rotate them down and play in the box, and Brisker will lay the wood. Really nice, well-rounded skill set, and a guy that once you see him in the 2nd round, especially when you look at mocks, and there are teams that took safeties in the 1st round, right? And there was reports Lewis Cines going to go 27 to Bucks. So this was a solid safety class, and it's one of those situations, kind of like where fantasy, where if there's an offense, take the Bengals offense, and there's a ton of wide receivers who are all going to have value, you kind of want to get the last one. Kind of felt like what Chicago did with the safety class, where it's like there's a bunch of them that are really, really good. Kyle Hamilton, the chieftain of them all, but there's plenty of other really solid safeties, Brisker, Cine, so on and so forth. And we kind of just got the one that fell to us, Jaquan Brisker. I think he's a great fit, especially for Matt Eberflus's defense. And pair him up with Eddie Jackson, I think that's a good mentor-mentee relationship. But again, well-rounded skill sets and guys who you can do a whole lot with. And even if you're not sitting in cover 2 or a 2-high look, cover 2, cover 4, given their skill set and how much you can do with both those guys, it's going to give opposing offenses and quarterbacks and specific headaches because, okay, this time it's Brisker rolling down, or now it's Eddie Jackson rotating down, or maybe they're bluffing and they're going to flop. So much, mind chess you can play there if you're Matt Eberflus and Alan Williams, the DC, coming over from Indianapolis, secondary coach there with the Colts, now the DC in Chicago. So I think that's a fantastic fit. And again, pairing him up with Eddie Jackson on top of the other 2nd round selection and Kyler Gordon paired up with Jalen Johnson, I'm excited about the secondary. That's about the only part of the roster outside of Justin Fields I can really say I'm excited about in Chicago. Sorry, Bears fans. Games to watch, and then we'll get you out of here. So common thread, I think these are all pretty winnable games. Week 3, and also have to say, not going to include division games. Anytime the Bears play the Packers and their team owner Aaron Rodgers, I'm going to watch it, and anytime they're playing the Vikings or the Lions, obviously that's some good TV to watch as well. But, week 3 against the Houston Texans, again, winnable game. You're at home. I'm always interested to see, what's this team looking like beginning of the year, towards the end of the year. And now week 3 is kind of a solid contest, level playing field, couple of second-year quarterbacks, and that's kind of a telling sign, too, because I don't think either situation's great around either one. Now, granted, Houston has, Laramie Tunsil, who I feel better about at left tackle than Riley Leaf, and they have Brandon Cooks, who's proven to be a number 1 target a lot more reliably than Darnell Mooney. All those points aside, maybe the situation's slightly better for Davis Mills, but where are we at with these second-year quarterbacks? Who looks better in this game? And that's going to feed some of the rhetoric as the year goes on, and we're talking about which of these quarterbacks is going to be out of a job potentially moving into year 3. And then week 6 against the Washington Commanders, this is going to be a fascinating battle. They made some improvements across the offensive line, they being the Bears, have done some solid work across the offensive line despite losing a James Daniels earlier this offseason. They patched it up. You're going to see a tough matchup with Washington, assuming Chase Young's playing by this point, which that's up in the air. But Montez Sweat, Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne. This is a team that gets after the quarterback. That's their biggest strength and identifying point on the defensive side. So how does that Bears offensive line hold up? And it's also a Washington secondary that, if William Jackson bounces back, it's a pretty solid secondary unit. Can Darnell Mooney, win on his own? Can't wait to see it. But it's also, kind of not a great offense in Washington, and maybe an opportunity to kind of create some turnovers and see the worst of Wentz and then get some extra offensive possessions and potentially steal one on Thursday Night Football, which is also a noteworthy ad here. A primetime game. That's always, kind of a game that extra incentives just because so many people are seeing it, and it just feels like it's adding that much more fuel to the fire, more eyes seeing it. So the rhetoric around it is going to be that much more hot. And then week 12 at the New York Jets, had to get a road game in here. And also, again, two teams probably in the bottom 8, what I call the bottom barrel of the league, in a winnable game at that point. And also going on the road, how's this team, fare away from the home confines, defense travels, so that's optimistic. This is also interesting because maybe Robert Quinn's not on the roster at this point, so what's that pass rush looking like? So fascinating game there, and it's again, battle between two second-year quarterbacks. How does Zach Wilson look like in an improved ecosystem, and what does Justin Fields look like with a supporting cast that really has only gotten worse? So if Wilson disappoints and Fields is looking, a lot better, people are going to be playing this what if game. Man, what if the Jets took Fields at 2 and, you still got Garrett Wilson and all that stuff. So what if possibilities going left and right for that Week 12 matchup between the Bears and the Jets? Can't wait to see it. But that's going to do it for my Chicago Bears season preview video. Tell me what you think about Chicago down below in the comment section. How many wins do you think this team can get? Who are some X factors, not superstars, but X factors on this roster? And some games you're looking forward to watching them play. I responded to just about every comment. So let's talk about the Bears down below. Hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to hit that like button. It'll help me out a ton. If you're new right here, want to help us get closer and closer to 1,000 subscribers, just hit that big red subscribe button down below. That's going to do it for me. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej, and I'm signing off.